Midnight, what happens when a rural hospital shuts down and your mom has a stroke 47 miles from help? Jasmine Crockett walked into Congress and said what millions were too afraid to. People are dying while you fund fences. In just 5 minutes, she dismantled Marjorie Taylor Greene's attack on public health funding. The fallout. 026, Greene went silent and Crockett's words sparked a nationwide movement. But what exactly did she say that shook the entire room to its core? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room was cold and sterile, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that drained color from the wood-paneled walls. Leather chairs lined the U-shaped desk, slowly filling with lawmakers in dark suits and tighter expressions. 056, flags stood stiff behind the podium. Red timers blinked down the seconds. Aides whispered, papers shuffled. No one smiled. The air felt heavy like a storm about to break. On the live feed, budget oversight hearing. Federal health funding to most just politics. But in the room, tension cracked like a silent match. Jasmine Crockett sat still, pen moving fast across a notebook. 121, a former Dallas prosecutor, now congresswoman. She was calm, unreadable, watching, not performing. No makeup for cameras, no flair, just a sharp navy suit in sharper silence. She didn't posture, she prepared. Then came Marjorie Taylor Greene, heels loud, folder thick, blazer red. Her entrance was deliberate. She thrived on spectacle. 146, she flipped open her binder like a weapon filled with screenshots and accusations. No hesitation, no filter, one glance at Crockett, a smirk. In her mind, she was already winning. She had no idea what was coming. Then, without waiting for a cue or glance from the chair, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned forward and pressed the button on her microphone with a snap. 211, the sound clicked through the room like a starting gun. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't need to. Let's just be honest here, she said, voice steady but edged with steel. This hearing, it's not really about helping people. It's about where we're putting our money. And right now, it's going to all the wrong places. She flipped open her binder, turning to a page marked in red, and held up a photo. 237, it showed a mobile health van parked outside a grocery store. A small line of patients waiting outside in lawn chairs. We're spending millions on this, she said. Free clinics driving around the country, handing out medicine, treating people who don't even pay into the system. This is what we call healthcare now. 3 o'clock, she slapped the photo down on the desk and leaned back just slightly, shoulders squared. I'm sorry, but this isn't sustainable. It's not even smart. We're pouring billions into programs that don't fix anything. They just keep people dependent. That's not solving a problem. That's making sure it never goes away. She paused, scanning the room. 326, meanwhile, our border is wide open. We've got drug cartels walking across with backpacks full of fentanyl, human traffickers, illegal crossings, crime, and instead of dealing with that, we're funding another mobile clinic in Oregon. That doesn't make sense. It's backwards. Now, her voice started to rise, not in anger, but with the rhythm of someone hitting a practiced beat. 354, here's my proposal. Let's move $3 billion out of these health programs and put it into the southern border. Into people and technology that can actually stop threats. I'm talking about boots on the ground, cameras, barriers, real solutions. She looked down, tapped the folder twice, because honestly, I'd rather stop a drug runner at the border than pay for a free flu shot at some church in Wisconsin. For 28, a low murmur stirred behind her, but she didn't flinch. She welcomed it. And before anyone says, I don't care. This isn't about not caring. It's about being smart with the money we've got. Every dollar should go to protecting American families, and right now that means securing the border. She turned again, locking eyes with Jasmine Crockett just long enough to let it linger. For 53, I know some of you are going to say I'm being heartless, but let me ask you, when did expecting people to follow the rules become a bad thing? When did protecting our country turn into something we have to apologize for? She picked up her papers, folded them slowly, precisely. I'm not going to apologize for wanting order, and if it's a choice between another free clinic or stopping the next truckload of fentanyl, yeah, I choose the border. 528, she set the folder down, folded her hands, and leaned back in her chair. No smile, just calm, hard certainty. She'd made her point, and now she was waiting, watching to see who'd push back first. And just when the room began to settle, Greene made her next move, the kind you don't walk back from. She reached into her folder, pulled out a small remote, and clicked it toward the screen behind her. 5:54, a video flickered to life. No graphics, no music, just raw cell phone footage. Shaky, grainy, unpolished. A mobile health van parked outside a food bank in rural Alabama. Volunteers moved briskly between dusty cars, handing out brown paper bags and bottles of water. Mothers bounced toddlers on tired hips. Elderly men leaned on walkers. 6:24, a teenage boy with a bandage on his arm stood with his eyes fixed forward beneath a makeshift canopy. Community health outreach free today. The line stretched around the block, some people with umbrellas, others just sweating quietly under the southern sun. The room stayed silent, not out of respect, out of tension. Everyone was waiting to see where this was going. 6:47, Greene's voice sliced through the stillness. "This is what we're funding," she said, slow and sharp. Vans driving around like the ice cream man, handing out medication like Halloween candy. No insurance, no ID, no questions. Just show up and get your gift bag. She clicked the remote again. The video froze. A volunteer handed a brown bag to a man in a faded t-shirt and a half-shaven beard. 7:16, "You call that care?" she asked. "Because to me it looks like a government-sponsored giveaway." Her voice wasn't angry. It was colder than that, clinical, like she was reading a diagnosis and wanted the room to absorb every word. "These aren't emergency rooms. They're handout stations, and no one is talking about the cost." She didn't pause to let that sink in. 7:42, she doubled down, reached into her folder again, held up a sheet of paper. "Here's what we found. Case number 1, male, 38, no job, hasn't filed taxes in 5 years, walks in, gets free insulin, no paperwork, says he's between jobs, been between jobs since 2019. Case number 2, female, 24, healthy, gets anxiety meds, and birth control because she's stressed about student loans." 8:12, she looked around the room, a practiced disgust curling in her tone. "This is what we call medical necessity." Now the room was dead still. So still you could hear the hum of the lights above. Greene leaned forward, both palms flat on the table. "Now let me be clear. This isn't about trauma. This isn't about heart attacks in parking lots. 8:39, this is about comfort, convenience, about building a culture where people are taught not to try. Just show up and Uncle Sam will make it better." She pointed at the frozen frame behind her. "That bag he's holding, that's not medicine. That's a message. It says you don't have to take responsibility. We'll do it for you. That's not policy. That's surrender." 9:05, she adjusted her seat but didn't break eye contact with the room. "And before you say, well, isn't that compassion? Let me ask you, what's more compassionate? Giving someone a pill or giving them a reason to get back up? Teaching people to stand, earn, contribute. Because this," she pointed again, stabbing at the air. 9:27, this is dependence wrapped in ribbon, and called kindness. The final sheet came down like a closing book, folded carefully, deliberately. Then she looked up, not at the committee, not at the chair, but into the camera lens, straight through it. "This is your money," she said to the viewers at home. "Every prescription, every gallon of gas for those vans. 9:51, every clipboard, it came from your paycheck. And these programs, they want more, billions more." Then with a voice like a verdict, "You call it community health. I call it political charity. The kind that keeps people down and calls it help. And I, for one, am tired of paying for it." She let it sit. Then she turned not to numbers, not to policy, but to the one person who hadn't said a single word. Jasmine Crockett. 10:19, she didn't say her name. She didn't need to. Her eyes drifted down the row, found her. Crockett, still writing, still silent. A slow smile crept across Greene's face, not warm, not amused. It was the smile of someone convinced they'd already won. I imagine some of my colleagues across the aisle, she began, drawing the words out like a dare. 1043, we'll try to tug at your heartstrings today. Her eyes narrowed on Crockett. Maybe talk about fairness or feelings or someone who cried because they couldn't afford a prescription. She dropped her voice. Let it sink. I don't do feelings, she said flatly. I do facts. I do numbers. I do national security. 11:05, Greene leaned back in her chair just slightly. But her posture was anything but relaxed. She was coiled, ready, expecting. Because while you're hearing about pain and moral obligation, I want you to remember this. None of that stops fentanyl. None of that secures a border. None of that fixes what's broken. 11:28, the chairwoman shifted, sensing the tension cresting. But Greene pushed once more, lower now, like a knife sliding under skin. I'm sure Congresswoman Crockett has a few stories prepared, she said, tilting her head. She's probably writing one now. Laughter, low and tight, rippled from her side of the aisle. Greene gave a knowing nod toward the pen in Crockett's hand. 11:52, she's always writing, always waiting. A pause then, but the country's not waiting. The country's bleeding. Crockett didn't look up. Not yet. But something had changed. A stillness in the air. A shift in gravity. Her shoulders straightened. Her hand paused, then calmly, without flinching, she turned the page. Crockett wasn't listening to Greene anymore. 12:20, not really. Her body was still there, pen in hand, but her mind had already left the room. She was somewhere else entirely, back in a place Greene had never been, a place no chart could measure, a place no insult could reach. The air in the hearing room faded, replaced by thick summer heat, and the low whir of a ceiling fan that did little more than stir the dust. 12:48, she was 9. Her mother had collapsed on the porch of their rural Texas home. Halfway between breathing and silence. Northwest neighbors close enough to hear her fall. No ambulance nearby. The closest clinic was 50 miles down a cracked 2-lane road with more cattle than cars. Her uncle drove like his hands were fire, but they still arrived too late to stop the seizure. 13:17, not fatal, not that time, but it carved a line in Jasmine's life she never forgot. A line between who gets help and who gets left behind. She remembered watching the nurses scramble. Remembered the hum of fluorescent lights above her mother's hospital bed. Remembered the words whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. If they'd gotten here just 10 minutes sooner. That sentence became a scar. 13:42, not the visible kind, the kind that makes you sit straighter in hearings like this. That keeps your hand steady when someone mocks a mobile clinic. That's why she never interrupts. Why she listens before she speaks, because she knows what happens when no one listens at all. Jasmine's fingers tightened just slightly around her pen, knuckles whitening for half a second before loosening again. 14:08, she was still writing facts, dates, quotes, but behind every number was a name. Behind every line of data, a life like her mother's. She knew Greene hadn't lived that silence. Hadn't stood in a patch of dirt, wondering if help would come before the last breath did. That's why she didn't flinch when Greene called it a gift bag. 14:32, because Jasmine had once prayed for a gift like that. Any bag, any van, any nurse with a blood pressure cuff. She wasn't ashamed of it. She remembered what desperation looked like, and she had promised herself long before she stepped into politics that no one else would feel that alone on her watch. So when Jasmine Crockett finally leaned into her microphone, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. 1500 hours, her tone was calm, but there was something beneath it. Steel wrapped in velvet. She didn't adjust her seat or flip her hair. She didn't even look at Greene right away. Instead, she looked at the chairwoman, then down at her notes, then slowly lifted her eyes toward the room. Congresswoman Greene, she said, her voice even but heavy with purpose. 15:25, have you ever ridden in the back of an ambulance for 40 minutes while someone you love was slipping away? Her words cut through the quiet like glass. Not for a photo op, not for a talking point. I mean, really been there. Middle of the night, no sirens loud enough. Just you, the driver, and a growing fear that you're too far from help. 15:49, she paused, but not to let the silence speak for her. She paused to let the truth breathe. I have, she continued, softer now, but no less clear. I was 9 years old. My mother collapsed on our front porch. There wasn't a hospital in our town anymore. They'd shut it down the year before. Budget cuts, staffing shortages. We had no choice but to wait. 1612, no paramedics, no urgent care, just my uncle driving 80 miles an hour down back roads in a pickup truck, hoping we could get to someone, anyone, before it was too late. She took a breath, and for a moment, the room felt like it had lost oxygen. We made it, but barely. I still remember the nurse whispering to another, 10 more minutes and she wouldn't have made it. 1635, you don't forget that. Not ever. Her fingers didn't shake. Her posture didn't shift, but the room had. Lawmakers who had been looking at their phones were now watching her hands, her face, the way her voice didn't crack, even though her words did. So when I hear talk about reallocating billions of dollars away from healthcare, she said, her eyes now locking on Greene, I don't hear strategy. 1703, I hear warning signs. I see mothers collapsing on porches with no one coming. I see what happens when we decide some lives are just too far away to care about. She turned back to her notes, not for drama, but for evidence, for reality. Let's talk about Newton County, Missouri, she said, flipping to the first page. 1729, hospital shut down last October. The closest ER is now 47 miles away. There's one clinic left, one nurse. They're open Tuesdays and Thursdays, noon to 5 o'clock. That's it. No overnight care, no emergency response, no ambulance that gets there in time. She looked around the room. And you want to tell me that money would be better spent on more fences, on more walls? 1756, let me ask you something. What does a wall do for someone having a stroke in the middle of the woods? Greene shifted in her chair. The room felt tighter, smaller. Tension was building, but Crockett didn't let it break. She kept her voice level, her tone surgical. You keep saying this isn't personal, that it's just numbers, just dollars and cents. 1820, but for people like me, for where I come from, these aren't statistics. These are stories written in pain, in funerals, in unanswered 911 calls. She paused again. The silence wasn't awkward now. It was earned. It held weight. Then Greene snapped. I didn't come here to listen to stories, she barked, hands slicing through the air. 1848, I came to talk about facts, not someone's personal sob story. Her voice was sharper than it had been all morning. Louder, a little desperate. But Crockett didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She turned her head slowly, looked Greene in the eye, and replied in the same voice she'd used all along, measured, unshaken. You call it a sob story, she said. 1911, I call it Tuesday night in my district. The words landed like thunder without sound. No shouting, no bravado, just truth. She returned to her notes calmly as if the room hadn't just been flipped inside out. Because in that moment, Crockett wasn't arguing. She was reminding them, reminding all of them what they'd come here to pretend didn't exist. 1935, but Crockett wasn't finished. Because personal stories were only part of the truth. The rest came from facts, real ones, the kind printed on government letterhead, the kind backed by data and lives. She flipped calmly through the tabs in her binder, stopping at a worn page she'd marked days ago. Let's talk about what we're spending money on. 1959, she began, her voice steady but firm. Right now, there's a push for $12 billion to build more walls, buy more border drones, and hand out new contracts for surveillance tech. $12 billion, and we're being told that's necessary, urgent. She paused, then looked straight across the aisle. 2019, but when we asked for $300 million to keep dozens of small-town hospitals open last year, we were told no, that it wasn't in the budget. That maybe we could try again next cycle. She shook her head, not in anger, but in disbelief. So, let me ask, how does that make sense? We can spend $12 billion to keep people out, but we can't spend $300 million to keep people alive. 2043, she flipped to the next page and held up a single highlighted line. In Newton County, Missouri, their only hospital closed last fall. No maternity ward, just gone. Now the closest emergency care is 47 miles away. That's almost an hour if the roads are clear. She let the silence hang for a beat. And it's not just Missouri. It's happening all over. 2111, rural hospitals are shutting down because we keep choosing other priorities and people are dying because of it. She pointed down at the page. The CDC says when a rural hospital closes, the death rate in that area can go up by nearly 30%. That's not a theory. That's not politics. That's people. She turned to a second report. 2136, this one thinner but heavier in meaning. FEMA now says that not having local health care is a national risk. Same level as a power grid failing or a cyber attack. Why? Because when disasters hit small towns with no doctors, no nurses, and no ambulances, we lose people fast. Not because they did something wrong, but because no one planned to protect them. 2203, her voice dropped slightly, not to soften the blow, but to sharpen it. You keep talking about the border, she said. I still on green. But what about the people who are already here? What about the dad in Arkansas who dies of a stroke because it took an hour for the ambulance to reach him? What about the mom in Mississippi who tries to make her insulin last 6 extra days because she can't afford to refill it yet? What about the kid with asthma in rural Texas who hasn't seen a real doctor in over a year? She wasn't performing. She was. 2238, testifying. You say this is about keeping people safe, Crockett said, leaning forward slightly. Well, my idea of safety is making sure a sick child can get to a clinic before it's too late. It's making sure a pregnant woman doesn't have to drive 2 hours just to give birth. It's making sure a 70-year-old veteran doesn't die alone in his trailer because we decided we'd rather buy more motion sensors than pay for a nurse to staff a clinic. Her eyes didn't blink. 2311, her voice didn't shake. We have the money. We just don't want to spend it on the people who need it most. And that's not about national security. That's about national neglect. The room was frozen, but she wasn't done. If we can find $12 billion for walls, we can find $300 million for hospitals. 2331, if we say we can't, then we've made a decision, one we should admit out loud, that we care more about guarding lines on a map than we do about keeping people breathing inside them. And then she finished with one sentence, quiet but impossible to ignore. This isn't about immigration. It's about abandonment. 2355, and if we keep calling that a policy choice, then we've already decided who gets left behind. But powerful words don't just land, they leave bruises. And as Jasmine Crockett's final sentence echoed through the room, not with force, but with calm precision, every eye turned. Not to her, but to the other side of the dais. To Marjorie Taylor Greene, the woman who had started the morning with swagger in her step and fire on her tongue, now sat stiff in her chair. 2400 hours 27, her expression caught between forced poise and something quieter. Uncertainty. It was subtle at first. Her jaw shifted, then reset. She tried a smirk, the kind she usually wore when she knew the cameras were watching, but this one didn't stick. Her lips moved into a half smile, too fast, too shallow. You're making it dramatic, she said finally, voice a notch higher than before. 2400 hours 53, this isn't Broadway. It's Congress. She laughed just once. It came out dry. No one laughed with her. She reached for her notes, flipping a page that didn't need flipping. Her fingers hesitated on the paper like they weren't sure what they were looking for. The numbers, the talking points, the punchlines. They were there, but they weren't landing anymore. 25:15, not after what Crockett had just laid down. Not after $12 billion was put side by side with insulin, birth, and death. Greene's hand moved to her water bottle. She twisted the cap too hard. It squeaked. She set it down, tapped the table once, then again, then again. Not rhythmic, not controlled, just nervous energy with nowhere to go. Across the committee table, no one said anything. 25:42, not Crockett, not the chairwoman, not even Greene's usual allies. For the first time, the room wasn't reacting to what Greene said. It was reacting to what she didn't say. Her silence spoke louder than her words had all morning. She was staring forward now, but not at anyone in particular. Not like before when every glance was a calculated jab. 26:04. Now she was avoiding eye contact, especially with Crockett. Crockett hadn't moved. She hadn't smiled. She hadn't even uncrossed her hands. She didn't have to. She didn't need to lean forward or speak again. She had already done what needed doing. And Greene knew it. Everyone knew it. There was no applause, no outburst, just the quiet, undeniable feeling of a shift. 26:26, one of those rare moments in Washington where the room itself knows something real just happened. Greene adjusted her jacket sleeve like it itched. She looked down again at her binder, still not reading, just looking, as if the numbers could protect her now, but the tone had changed. 26:45, her voice, just minutes earlier so sharp, so sure, now carried a small edge of defense. "You're turning this into something it's not," she muttered. Not loud enough to reset the room, but just loud enough to fill the silence. "You're playing to emotion." "I'm trying to talk facts." But her own voice betrayed her. The confidence was gone. 27:05, what was left was posture without power. She wasn't debating anymore. She was reacting. And for anyone watching closely, staffers, aides, even the journalists in the back, it was clear this was the moment the momentum left her side. Not because she had been shouted down, not because someone raised their voice louder than hers, but because someone had the truth and delivered it so plainly that no defense felt real afterward. 27:33, Greene didn't crumble. She didn't storm out. That wasn't her style, but her hand tapping the desk didn't stop. Her eyes kept drifting away from Crockett. Her laugh, the one that used to rattle a room, had lost its timing. And for the first time all morning she looked like someone trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through her fingers. And just when it seemed Greene might regain her footing, when she reached for her binder, tapped her notes, adjusted her sleeve like she still had control, Crockett looked up, and quietly stripped. 28:06, that illusion away. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move. Her posture was still, her expression steady, but the question she asked next cut through every talking point in the room. "Congresswoman," she began with a tone so calm it somehow felt louder than Greene's strongest shout. "If your mother lived in a small town in Kansas and she got sick in the middle of the night and the roads were closed because of a flood and the only place giving real-time updates on where the rescue routes were was a public radio station, would you?" 28:42, still call that a waste of money? She let it hang. No rush. None was needed. The room froze. No one shifted. No one whispered. Even the reporters stopped typing. The hum of the overhead lights suddenly felt louder, like the only sound left in the entire building. Everyone waited, not because they expected a brilliant response, but because they knew something just changed. 29:06, because Crockett hadn't just asked a political question, she'd asked a human one. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene, the woman who had spoken all morning about waste and dependency and real Americans, was on the receiving end of it. Crockett didn't blink. "I want to know," she continued, "would you still call that funding unnecessary? Would you still say public radio is political theater if the only voice your mother could hear in the dark was telling her which road could save her life?" Across the room, Greene shifted, not confidently, not like before. This 29:39 wasn't the movement of someone standing their ground. It was the movement of someone suddenly unsure where the ground was. She gave a half laugh, a hollow one. The kind meant to buy time, not land a blow. Her fingers drummed the desk again, but this time it wasn't defiant, it was nervous, restless. She looked up, eyes scanning, but not locking onto anyone. She didn't answer. 30:02, instead, she tried to smile, just barely. A weak twitch at the corners of her mouth. The same look someone wears when they know a camera is still rolling, but the words are gone. "You're twisting it," she mumbled. "You're making it emotional." But Crockett didn't react. She didn't pounce. 30:21, she just let the weight of the silence return. Because that was the truth. Greene couldn't answer. Not really. Because to answer truthfully would mean admitting that yes, even she might one day rely on the very system she had spent hours trying to tear down. That her own family in the wrong place at the wrong time could be the next to need that wasteful emergency broadcast. 30:43, that the idea of handouts gets real quiet when it's your mother on the line. The cameras were still rolling, but Greene no longer seemed to care about the angles. She didn't push back. She didn't redirect. She didn't fire another accusation. She simply went quiet, eyes cast down, hands still, face unreadable. 31:04, not because she had won, but because in that moment, everyone in the room knew she had nothing left to say. And in that stillness, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't look smug. She didn't move at all. Because that silence, that was her answer. And it was louder than anything else said that day. 31:25, and in that silence, something even more unexpected happened. Not a cheer, not a speech, not a dramatic reaction, but a small, quiet shift in the room's balance. Congressman David Keller, a long-serving Republican from Wyoming, sat near the middle of the dais. He wasn't loud, never had been. He didn't court headlines, didn't post clips on Twitter, didn't wear party allegiance like a brand. 31:51, he was old school. A former rancher turned public servant, known more for his calm than his commentary. He hadn't said a word all morning, not when Greene launched her first attack, not when the hearing turned sharp. He just sat there listening, watching, taking it all in. But now, as Crockett's words settled over the chamber, like dust in a quiet field, there is no policy more important than a human life. 32:17, something in his face changed just slightly. His brows softened, his eyes, weathered and heavy-lidded, lifted from his notes and landed on her. Not with judgment, not with curiosity, but with recognition. There was a pause. Then very slowly he gave a single nod, not big, not dramatic, not the kind that demanded cameras. It was the kind of nod a man gives when someone else says what he's been thinking for years, but never said out loud. 32:46, a nod not of politics, but of truth. He didn't speak. He didn't follow it with a statement. He didn't have to. That one motion said it all. I hear you and I believe you, it didn't escape the room. The chairwoman glanced sideways. A Democratic staffer's pen froze mid-scribble. Even a junior Republican aide near the back blinked like he wasn't sure what he just witnessed. 33:11, and across the table Greene sat rigid, still looking down at her paperwork, still tapping her finger harder now like she was trying to drown out what she knew had just happened. Because Greene had spoken for almost an hour, and not once had she received the kind of silent agreement. Not from her side, not from any side. But Crockett had. 33:35, she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't moved from her seat. And yet somehow she had reached across that wide political divide and pulled one person, one conservative, long respected, slow to react, into the space between right and wrong. Not with theatrics, not with spin, but with the one thing even the most hardened politicians can't ignore, live truth. 34:02, and Crockett, she saw the nod. Of course she did. But she didn't react. She didn't smile or acknowledge it or let it change her tone. Because this wasn't about winning a moment. This wasn't a game. That nod wasn't applause. It was witness. It was someone saying, "You're right. Even if I can't say it out loud, you're right." It was small. 34:22, it was quiet, but it was also irreversible. Something had cracked, and everyone knew it. And while the hearing room stayed frozen in silence, something else had already begun outside. Something faster than any debate, louder than any gavel. Without warning, without plan, the line had slipped through the walls of Congress and landed straight in the bloodstream of the internet. 34:46, it wasn't a speech. It wasn't a viral stunt. It was just one sentence. Crockett had said it almost in passing, after everything else had been said, almost too quiet to catch. Asterisk, the American people don't need imaginary borders. They need real clinics, asterisk, but someone had heard it. Someone had clipped it. Someone had posted it. 35:10, and by the time she closed her binder, it was already spreading like wildfire. The video was short, 12 seconds. No dramatic music, no flashy edits, just the camera trained on Crockett's face, her voice low and steady, her eyes locked in truth. The line hit different, not because it was clever, but because it was raw. And because people had been waiting for someone, anyone to say exactly that. 35:34, within an hour, the clip had bounced across TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. People weren't just watching it. They were stitching it, remixing it, repeating it. Someone layered it over photos of shuttered hospitals in Arkansas, of empty pharmacy shelves in Nebraska. Another stitched it beside footage of mothers in rural Alabama standing in line at mobile clinics. 35:59, someone else set it to a simple piano track, slowed it down, and played it over flashing images of emergency rooms closing one after another across red state counties. The comment sections didn't argue, they confessed. Asterisk, this is my hometown. We lost our hospital in 2019 and haven't had prenatal care since, asterisk. 36:22, asterisk, my dad had a stroke and we had to drive 90 miles. He didn't make it, asterisk, a teacher in Kansas filmed her own reaction, holding up the video as tears filled her eyes. Asterisk this. This is what we've been trying to say. Not left or right, just real. We're dying out here and nobody's listening, asterisk. Then the remixes came. One was simple. 36:47, Crockett's voice slowed and looped over a beat. Her line repeating like a mantra. Asterisk, real clinics, not walls. Real lives, not lines, asterisk. It played over drone footage of small towns, gas stations, trailers, long highways with no hospitals in sight. It wasn't flashy. It was quiet. And because of that, it hit harder than anything loud ever could. 37:12, teenagers shared it from school libraries. Nurses blasted it on Bluetooth speakers behind clinic desks. A combat vet reposted it with a caption, asterisk, I fought overseas. I came home and couldn't get a blood pressure check for 6 weeks. This woman is telling the truth. Asterisk, local news caught it first, then regional, then national. 37:38, but the viral moment wasn't about fame. It wasn't about going big. It was about going deep. It was about reaching places that DC rarely thinks about. It was about someone finally saying the quiet part out loud. That we've spent too long pretending concrete and cameras keep us safer than care. That policy without compassion leaves people to die quietly out of frame. 38:05, that lives don't stop mattering when they live in towns with no lobbyists. Crockett didn't post it. She didn't promote it. She didn't have to. The country did it for her. Because in that moment millions of Americans weren't watching a politician. They were hearing someone finally speak like a neighbor, and they were ready to pass it on. 38:24, but while Crockett's words moved across the country like a quiet revolution, Marjorie Taylor Greene's silence began to grow roots. At first it looked like nothing, just a skipped interview, a rescheduled press briefing, a vague excuse about travel demands. But those who had followed her for years could tell the difference. She wasn't avoiding the media. 38:43, she was avoiding the moment. The moment when people would look her in the eye and repeat the one sentence she had no answer for. Asterisk, the people don't need imaginary borders. They need real clinics, asterisk. It was showing up everywhere now. On handmade signs, on bumper stickers, on the backs of protesters' t-shirts outside her next event, which she cancelled 2 hours before go time. 39:05, without explanation. Her staff scrambled. They circulated new memos. They reworded her statements, but they couldn't rewrite what had already happened. She hadn't lost an argument. She had lost a room and the internet. She still walked the Capitol halls, still kept her head high in public, but her pace had changed. 39:26, she didn't linger for cameras. She ducked them. She didn't meet reporter eyes. She waved them off with one-word replies, always in motion. The fire was still there, maybe, but it flickered. The spark she used to weaponize had dimmed, not